And yet, some of the best creative minds, you've got somebody you mentioned from your experience. We've had people on the podcast who've said, if you can land your campaign messaging in one line on a billboard, your campaign will work. And I think
Yep.
that is such a fantastic testament for the actual medium that if they're not talking about if your TVC makes people cry when they watch it. They're talking about, can you land your messaging with one line on a billboard? Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us for today's episode of the pod. Today, we have our 6th episode of our Client's Point of View series, and this series has become one of my favorite on the podcast. I love sitting down with the heads of marketing and brand management to understand what are they thinking about out of home, what's keeping them awake at night, what do they love about out of home, what do they find challenging. It's just been such a beautiful entry into, I really feel like I've been invited at the table for a half an hour sit down with such critical players in the out-of-home landscape to understand everything they're thinking and feeling around out of home. So I really, really am so excited to welcome our guest today. Our guest today is Johanni Jennings, who is the head of marketing for Auto and General and partnerships at the Telesure Investment Holdings Group. Johanni, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's my absolute pleasure, Liv. How are you guys doing?
We're doing good. We are ready and excited for today's episode. As I mentioned, this series is actually one of my favorites. I don't like to play favorites with my children because they're all equal. All episodes are equal. But it's really, I just love getting that insight. So many times in the media landscape, you feel like there are gaps of information, whether you're sitting on the media owner side and you can't seem to get time with the agency, or you're on the agency side, but your client is really busy, or sometimes the pace is so fast, you don't have time to stop the client and say, hey, what do you actually think about the out-of-home channel? Or what do you actually think about the rebrand that's just happened? So the pace is too fast sometimes to get down to that detail. So that's what I love about these kind of episodes. And being the only out-of-home podcast in South Africa, I think it really feels a nod to us that we've had such amazing guests, such as yourself, joining us today to give us that inside track. We know from the latest State of Out-of-Home report and competitor audit that's been done by outdoor auditors that the insurance category, I think there's no other way really to say it, is alive with activity in out-of-home. We know that there are about 30 brands that are competing in the space. And I think this volume of brands that are all fighting for the same share of the pie almost from an attention perspective, I think has led to this explosion in creativity that we're seeing, where so many brands are pushing the envelope, seeing how to do things differently. And there was a time years ago, you would always look to kind of the alcohol brands first for something like that, or even some of the FMCG products. Whereas now I find myself looking to the insurance category to find out what are they doing in out of home? What is the latest thing that's happening? What messaging are they communicating and how so? So I really love the evolution that category has taken. And it kind of leads me to my first question, just as we settle into our episode today, is to find out from you, what is exciting you the most in the current landscape of out of home?
I think the flexibility out of home gives you as a brand owner. I think in the good old days, people saw out of homes as big billboards, and it was maybe an enhancer of your awareness stats. But I find in our world of auto in general, we've found such a unique way of using out of home. We use it either very strategically in a traditional fashion where we boost our awareness levels and we boost our OTCs. But we've also found it very, very successful as a tactical driver, or even for a brand like Auto in General that has multiple product lines as an extension of your storyline to befit the different benefits of the product lines themselves. So if I had to sum it up in one word, I would say the magic of out of home is definitely flexibility.
Yeah. I love that you've kept it simple in that way. And I think that the flexibility, usually the kind of knee-jerk reaction is to think around flexibility, and you immediately think about digital out of home because of the flexibility that offers. But I think that there definitely is the same level of flexibility when you look at some of the other media channels and the other options available in out of home from a format type perspective. And I think that, this flexibility is allowing brands to be really tactical. So I think the tactical of execution in out of home is also really fascinating around what can be done if you really just take a big step back, take a breath, and see how do we want to be so intentional with our media placements? How do we want to make sure we're ticking all the boxes? I really love how you've highlighted that.
I wanted to just say, I think the flexibility has also come from the launch of programmatic digital out of home. That's really given a lot more flexibility to out of home
Yeah.
over the last few years. And as I understand it, Johanni, is that you've also been looking at and utilizing programmatic digital out of home. And that really does speak to the flexibility of being really tactical in out of home.
Absolutely. A very good example of that is we relaunched our brand CR about 18 months ago. And it was a very, very far departure from the old look and feel. So the old look and feel, there was a lot of black and white and silver integrated into the CI. And we moved away from that, going for a more modern classic look with a lot of more red, a different font type in our logo, etc. And what we were concerned about as we took this new brand to market, or its brand look to market, was that people wouldn't know what they were looking at. They would misattribute what they were seeing, the red and the new font types, etc., and they wouldn't know it's auto in general. So we used programmatic out of home in the first week of our launch to first establish all the memory structures around our new CR before we started rolling out our big mammoth campaign.
That makes a lot of sense, like to really build that, to build that traction using programmatic digital out of home and the flexibility that provides, and even just digital out of home if it was a direct loop buy, also just giving that flexibility. And I love how you said now build the memory structures, let it do that job for you, and then you come out with some of that creative, strategic, impactful, static out of home through the landscape. And what I was also seeing, out of what you've been, doing as out of in general in the out of home space was this mix and strategically mixing digital out of home and static and using both of these formats for the strategic effective capabilities that they deliver. And I really loved seeing that, how you were bringing those together. And then I think even more so was how you were, using the rules around, creative messaging being done right in the out of home space. We've had a lot of heads of creative directors come onto the podcast who's really spoken about those rules when you look at creative in the out of home space. And I like to see that when you were working with auto in general, how you really landed that. And I don't know if you want to unpack that a bit more for us, because, Kantar, there was a stat from Kantar that spoke about, 50% of that campaign effectiveness is due to the creative messaging and how that is crafted and how it is delivered on the out of home, platform. So really share more with us about how you really landed that for that auto in general campaign.
Yeah, I'd love to, because it was so deliberate. Nothing was accidental. And I think sometimes when we use the word tactical, people assume it was hurried, it was just off the cuff, it wasn't planned for a very particular purpose. But in our case, it was. So let me sketch the framework for you. In your podcast, you've often covered before creative and what best practice creative looks like. And simplicity, I still do believe reigns supreme. You want to keep it really, really simple. I once worked with a creative director I truly respect, and he used to say when he was ideating for a big idea, he used to know he hit it if he could summarize the whole campaign in a single sentence on a billboard. If you could capture the campaign on a billboard, you knew he had it. And that's a level of simplicity and discipline that you need to have on billboards. And that's what we tried to achieve with our launch campaign, which was called Suddenly. So let me give you a little bit of background. Auto in General's brand positioning is all about commitment to quality and commitment to what we call claim certainty. So when customers deal with us, we would like them to know that we're there. We've got the experience, we've got the history, we pay attention to the detail, we invest in technology, we invest in people, we invest in best practice to make sure that our clientele don't only get the best service, but they get the best claims experience they possibly can. And that's why we're very proud to say that we are never not there for our customer base. And what we try to illustrate in our Suddenly campaign is a number of really big events, the largest of which was the Knysna fires of 2017, where Auto in General stood up and supported its country, its community, its clientele when the Knysna fires were raging across the coastline and causing absolute havoc. Now, to illustrate that in a very simplistic way on billboard, we used billboards quite strategically in their placement and how the creative then complemented the placement themselves. So we worked with a double tag messaging structure where one of our lines was, when suddenly happens, who's there for you? We provoked, we asked. When those bad things happen, large or small, who really is there for you? Take a moment, reflect on this, and decide who has your back. And then we answered our own question with our statement of pride, which was auto in general, never not there when suddenly happens. And when I say we use creative positioning to support this messaging lines, we, for example, would look for two corners of a building, where on the one side you would have the when suddenly happens, who's there for you, and on the other side, auto in general, never not there when suddenly happens. And we very deliberately designed the two questions very differently. So whenever we asked the provoking question, when suddenly happens, who's there for you, we demonstrated a suddenly moment. So in our language, a suddenly moment is when devastation, catastrophes hit you unexpectedly. And that might be a storm, it might be a break-in, it might be a motor car accident, or it might be the Knysna fires. And then the auto in general, never not there when suddenly happens, we kept it very simple and elegant in our red CR in order to complement those memory structures I spoke about building up earlier. And that is one of the very creative ways in both placements and in design that we used in our Autumn General launch campaign.
There's so much to unpack in the examples that you've given. And I want to loop back to what you mentioned around the creative messaging and keeping it simple. And I will take this to the grave with me, right? In that there's such competitiveness between the different media channels, and everybody's obsessed with digital and taking money from everywhere else and investing on digital. And TV's always been the hero, and out of home is always the first line of the schedule to be taken off. And all of these negative, not negative feelings, but it feels like at times out of home, it has to fight so hard all the time. And yet, some of the best creative minds, you've got somebody you mentioned from your experience. We've had people on the podcast who've said, if you can land your campaign messaging in one line on a billboard, your campaign will work. And I think that that is such a fantastic testament for the actual medium, that if they're not talking about if your TVC makes people cry when they watch it. They're talking about, can you land your messaging with one line on a billboard? So I just wanted to loop back on that because I love that.
The amount of times we've had guests come on and speak that exact thing that you've just also, shared in this episode, I think it just reaffirms it. And I hope all the listeners that are listening to the podcast are like getting that message loud and clear, is like, let's reduce the amount of copy on the billboards out in the landscape. Let's, if we are using digital out of home, let's use it tactically. Let's use it for the abilities that it has, but let's not also just put a TVC on the digital out of home. So I think it's being reaffirmed time and time again in each episode that we have. And I love that it keeps coming up, because the more times I think it comes up, the more that there's this sort of accountability being held in the industry to say, like, how many episodes has this been raised now? Like, let's be honest, like, get it right on the out of home in the landscape. And it's amazing to see when it is done right.
And I do think the creative community, and I include with that the brand owners themselves, shouldn't be scared of applying the craft and whittling down and really finding that perfect line. And whether it's your campaign line that you're trying to capture on it, that one simple message, or whether you just have a really smart tactical line, it has a similar effect in terms of the success of your billboards. And I want to give you another example. So the big major campaign is what I spoke about now, but we've also very successfully used it to highlight some of our lesser known product categories. So we've got stuff like scratch and dent products. We've got locksmith assist benefits if you've locked your keys in your cars, etc. And what we did over December, when we knew there were going to be a whole lot of people in malls, is we brought out stock and inventory in malls and in parking lots, and we came up with these very quippy one-liners, which we hope would just remind people of the circumstance and the environment that they were in. So one, for example, was, did an errant trolley dent your door? And then we would just had
I love that. So smart.
And it just says insurance with scratch and dent. That was it. It's just a device little icon that we use. We call them our quality buttons. The other one was back with your shopping, but not your keys. And then the little product button spoke to the locksmith assist product that we had. And that was it. It was just two provoking
and contextually
questions.
relevant. Like,
Contextually
I think,
relevant.
the great thing about out of home is that if you use the environment that the ad is in, or the communities that it's in, and speaking in the language of the people in those communities, or like you were saying now, in the mall environments, the trolleys, the leaving your keys while you're shopping, use that context of what the consumer is experiencing in that environment. What are they doing? What are they thinking? How are they behaving? Tie that into that contextual relevancy, that consumer insight, tie that into the message on your out of home creative. And I think often there's this disconnect, if I can say that way, that there's this disconnect between the creative and the media. And I think when that happens, again, out of home, you lose that opportunity of bringing in that environmental, contextual relevancy or the consumer insight in that environment. Because, I mean, out of home is literally out of your home. In South Africa, it is everywhere, from in your malls to, in taxi ranks to in taxis to,
Yeah,
I mean, we could go on and on and on about the different
yeah,
formats. But I mean, just
yeah.
really bringing those two together and complementing each other in such a way that it creates that effective campaign where you're saying to us, and I went, such a true human insight about the trolley, the car, being at the shops, and aligning that to the brand and your offering and your services. Just, yeah, really,
That's
really
so
amazing.
critical, right? Because I think a lot of brand owners are nervous about playing around with their creative. In the old days, we were taught you come up with your creative big idea or your creative platform, and then you go and copy and paste it in all your different mediums because you shouldn't be to disrupt your CI, keep it all standardized, etc. And I think in that discipline, people have lost the ability to think contextually about where their message and their brand needs to live. And instead of honoring the medium and applying the creative platform appropriately in the medium, there's just a whole lot of copying and pasting going on. And what a loss to the brand owner if you are caught up in that type of bad habit, shall I call it, because you lose such wonderful opportunities to do smart and clever things, which will help your impact and therefore help your memory structures, help the recall of your creative, help your awareness. Because if you're flighting a whole lot of creative that is boring, you can fly it 100 times, people remember it once. But if
Yeah.
you fly out a really good piece of creative, you fly it once or twice, people will speak about it, they'll remember it for forevermore. And it makes your brand stretch further. So it's so critical, to your point, to honor the environment that your creative goes up in.
If a media owner received artwork, say it was an out of home supplier and they received artwork and they were like, this is not great, it's too much copy, or it looks like a print ad going onto a billboard, and they went back to the client side and said, this is our recommendations. We do feel that there is too much copy, reduce the copy. Do you think that that's something, clients or, yourself, in your experience would be open to that type of, recommendations? They know their platforms, they know their formats, particularly when it's different, strange formats. It's not just your normal standard billboards. There's, as I said earlier on, there's formats
Yeah,
throughout the landscape. Is that something that you would be open to if a media owner came back to say, you know what, we do know our
absolutely.
format? Okay.
Absolutely, absolutely. You don't want to waste your money, right? You want to know that
Mm.
it's best. And who knows that medium better than the media owner themselves? And they know what works and what doesn't work. Yeah, a few hints and pointers to make it work optimally, of course. And in fact, in our world, we often have workshops with media owners, from the TV guys right through to the digital guys, to understand the mediums, the best practice for the mediums, etc. And that shouldn't be different with out of home at all.
Yeah. And I love that answer because I think from a media owner point of view, if you have the right creative on your inventory, it really is showing off the capabilities of your inventory. It really is
Yes,
showing the
I
impact that,
agree.
it can deliver. So I think taking on that accountability of really wanting good creative, using the inventory in a way that can make an impact, and going back to your clients, don't be shy, call out to the listeners and the media owners, don't be shy to go back to your clients and, and say, this is our advice, this is our tips when using our inventory or our formats. This is what we advise is the best way to make it effective. I think,
Yeah.
sometimes it's not just about accepting the brief and getting it flighted. It's about how do you make sure that this campaign can wow? Because one, it's about you want your inventory to look great. Two, you want the retention strategy. You want that client to renew, from a media owner's point of view. And if the campaign did exceptionally well, there's more of a likelihood, that they would renew that campaign or look to you again for future campaigns.
I want to give you a practical example of that. A media very recently did a heat mapping of our creative on their inventory. And what they pointed out to us was that our call to action was way too small. It was only getting 2% of the attention span. Our headline was doing fine. Our logo could use a little bit of tweaking, but our call to action was tiny and it was just not successful. And that was such a wonderful insight for both ourselves and our creative agency because we hadn't realized it. Just judging at face value, it looked fine in terms of beautiful design, but in terms of the practical nature of it, the job that was supposed to do, it was to drive people to our website, it was way too small. And in our world of insurance, in this particular short-term insurance, where we are very direct, in which means that every time we put out a creative asset, the telephone needs to ring. Little tweaks like that, making sure that your call to action is the right size and drives the right behaviors is critically important because our media is our storefront. People purchase insurance from the TV commercial or the Facebook ad or the out of home billboard that they see. You can't afford not to have those call to actions strong. So that was one of those instances where media owner took a moment and actually saved our bacon for us.
Can you just say that again? Because you've landed that point so beautifully, and I haven't actually heard that expression before, but can you land the point about the storefront? Because it's brilliant.
So I think it's a very nice way to describe what direct response marketing is all about. Whether you're in the insurance category or whether you are in the telecos or any other type of industry where you do lead generating. Um, we speak about it as the media is your storefront. And what we mean by that is that there isn't insurance, by and large, isn't a tangible product category. It's not like a bottle of milk or peanut butter that you can hold and taste and feel, or a car that you can go and test drive. It's a policy document, and that's as tangible as it gets. And so the way that we create experiences for our customers and the way that we create connections is in the media environment. And we use the media environment to lead generate. And so the shop front, that store window where they pass by and go, ooh, I like what I'm seeing right now. That looks interesting. Oh, there's a special on the go. All of that activity actually happens in our media environments. And so when we do media planning, our lead generation funnel planning is of the utmost importance. From, do people know who we are? Do they consider us and are we on their desired list? Are they ready to step over the line and convert and actually purchase us? And in all of this, we've used out of home very, very successfully to drive our lead generation down the funnel.
Nalissa Media, your brand, their eyes, amplified with our out-of-home solutions. Get your brand to the people with Nalissa Media's dynamic out-of-home media solutions, tailored to fit your unique campaign needs. Whether you want to engage audiences on billboards, transit ads, or digital screens, we have the right platform for you. Elevate your brand visibility and impact with our innovative and cost-effective solutions.
Yeah, I love that. And I want to just circle back on a few points that you've made that I think have been landed really well. And I think, first of all, congratulations to you and your team and your media team around the intentional execution is what I'm loving. Is that it reminds me of an episode we had with Chris Buerter, who's the head of park advertising for South Africa. And he said it's around noticing how some brands are all in and out of home. And when you're all in, it means you do it intentionally. So you guys obviously have other media channels that you work with too. But I love that, when you gave that Suddenly campaign example, it was about the format. How will the messaging with having the two messages live on a specific format? What format types do we need to execute the creative messaging? When you give your example of what you guys were doing in the malls, where will we need to be placing these sites so somebody sees them as they're heading back to their car or while they're standing next to their car? So I just really love that intentional thread that's run through around using out of home and creativity, not just a spray and pray approach to hope that somebody will see it. You've also mentioned around lead gen and around, the billboards essentially being your storefront. And I love that because, again, it speaks to how critical the role of out of home is for a non-brick and mortar brand. There isn't a specific store to visit, and it gives it that tangible aspect. I think, we know that out of home builds trust and credibility for brands. And I think the coupling of an insurance brand and building that thread of trust on a format that demands and delivers on trust, I also think is really, really critical. You touched on something earlier that I wanted to loop back to. You mentioned that Auto in General had gone through a CI or creative refresh. And I wanted to ask you, non-related to out of home specifically, but sitting with your marketing hat on, what does it feel like to be on the side of a brand that you've built to a point, and then it comes to the point of saying, okay, we're going to be doing a CI refresh? Um, that must surely be quite an emotive moment in understanding how will the audience perceive the brand? Will they get it? What will they think of it? I would love to just hear what your experience going through that CI refresh was like.
Well, you wouldn't know this, but interesting little anecdote is that this is the second time I've been involved with a rebrand for Auto in General. The previous time was about 10, 15 years ago, and I
Wow.
was still on agency side, and I was working for the advertising agency that was helping out with the rebrand. And the second time around, it was as a brand owner. And so Auto in General as an institution lies very close to my heart because I've been through various iterations of the brand. Um, if you're asking, when do you know it's right? There are a lot of hard indicators that tell you that it's right. You start losing market share, you start losing attention share. You can just see it. You're looking old and frayed. And it's time to sharpen things up. In our case, it wasn't a hard decision to do the refresh, which was about March last year. And the reason for this was, in our minds, it was a reboot of the business and of the brand. It was setting up the brand for the next 10 years of its life. So it was a process of regeneration. It was a process of optimism and hope. It was a lovely process to be part of because what we saw was the future and building it off such a sound foundation as part of our change management inside our organization and with many of our partners, and partnerships also falls in my portfolio. So I take care of all our very important broker communities, other types of partnerships, etc. It was important for us to look back at the history of Auto in General and where it's come from, and the journey that it's walked for the past 40 years, and how it's come to be one of the iconic brands in the South African insurance landscape. And so using that as the foundation made it easy to build on the future because it was you taking flight from something that is strong and foundational. And we're very intentional about the difference we want to make in the South African community. So just going from strength to strength, envisioning how we're going to be better and stronger for the future so that we can pass on doing good so much further. Who wouldn't want to be part of that?
Yeah. And that I can just tell your passion for the brand come through, and the reasoning behind this refresh, and so, building on a very strong foundation but building for the future. And I really felt that come through. And it's so amazing how, when you work on a brand, even from an agency point of view, when you work on a brand for so many years, you really start to take on that brand and the passion and live that brand.
Yeah.
And I really felt that come through. But when you were talking about, making an impact to communities, it triggered something in my thoughts. And I was thinking about how much around sustainability and out of home is starting to come up in the conversations around the boardroom table for yourself and possibly some of the other colleagues that you work with, because it is quite a key topic, and I don't want to use the word trend, but an important topic for out of home and focus area globally, not just from a local point of view. And I'm just really interested to hear, is that coming up on a client side, the conversation about, we know out of home driving social impact in some of the campaigns that are done in communities, but also from a sustainability point of view. Is that important for clients to know how media owners are driving that sustainability agenda?
Especially in South Africa, where there's such a need for corporate citizens to take a leading position in society. It's definitely discourse that happens around the boardroom all the time. And I'm very proud to be part of a brand, part of a mother organization, Telesure Investment Holdings, which holds corporate social investment and corporate social responsibility very close to their hearts. And there are a number of initiatives that are in play at any given time. And so having media owners share in that partnership is absolutely critical for us. In my world, once again, a practical example I can give you is we have what we call the Never Not There catastrophic events, where we want to just give high alerts if there is a situation where our customers might be in danger of sorts. So, for example, if there are heavy rains coming down, we know that areas prone to floods. We have partnered with a out of home, a digital partner who is helping us execute it. So we've got a bit of a red telephone system going, and if something happens in an area that we believe is at a important level to respond to, we activate the red telephone system, and they activate their digital billboards with messagings of warning and safety and precaution and things that you can do, whilst we continue that narrative in our organic social, just to make sure that our clients, but also the communities that they come from, are safeguarded. Because ultimately, that's the business we are in as insurance. It's not just to clean up and restore after a catastrophic event, but it's also to make sure that you can mitigate the impacts of serious events.
Yep. That's absolutely phenomenal. I wasn't aware of that. I wasn't aware that, that's something
Yeah,
that
me
you guys,
neither. I
I
love
think it's
that.
so incredible. I'm a little speechless, to be honest. I think it's,
And it's obviously very geographical. So it wouldn't be a national rollout if there is a snowstorm in a small town. But what we do try is try and reach the small town to make sure that the citizens of that town are
that's brilliant.
safeguarded.
Yeah, but I love it. I think also what I love about it is that sending out this like hotline to the out of home site, to digital out of home, is absolutely fantastic. That's what the broadcast medium of out of home is supposed to be used for. So I really love that. I think it also touches on, again, this intentional focus you guys have around being very tactical, and now we've looped in the geographically tactical. And I
Yeah.
know that one of the brands within the portfolio is the Faseka brand. And I wonder if you could just talk to us. I know it's a niche audience brand, but I'd love to understand what work you guys have been doing in that space. That again touches on these pillars of this intentional, geographically tactical approach to out of home.
I'd love to share that with you. Fashika used to be in my portfolio, and we had such fun with it in the out of home space. Just to give your listeners some context, so Fashika is a short term insurance brand that caters for the needs of the Afrikaans speaking community in South Africa. And so it's very, very, very niche. And so the media planning, that storefront planning that we had to do for Fashika had to be absolutely spot on, because you can easily waste if people can't understand the language. And so it made absolute perfect sense for us to try and regionalize and find places where there are the highest density of Afrikaans speakers living and working, ring fence that, and then try and reach these consumers with out of home. And that's the beauty, right? Circling back to the first comment I made, the beauty, the flexibility of out of home, and why I love it as a medium to work with. It allowed us to go very niche and very geographically intended. And we started a program which I fondly refer to as the traveling circus. So having a billboard holding with particular messaging, and then traveling it around the country from little town to little town where we know a lot of Afrikaans speakers live, to make sure that we have the largest media footprint we possibly can in this very particular little tiny niche market. Very successful for us. And you know where we picked that up, the success factor, the metric was website visits. Whenever we have a traveling circus come through a particular area, we can see that area's website visits start to increase.
To move us to our close, I think I want to just ask you, out of all these formats that I know Out of Home has in South Africa, and we have such amazing places to play and such great canvases to paint when it comes to Out of Home in South Africa, what would you say from your point of view, having been in media or working within a brand space for so many years? What would you say is your most favorite and captivating Out of Home formats in South Africa, and why?
I spent a large portion of my career in the creative agency, so anything obscure really appeals to my personal taste, because if you can find an odd location and you can do something brilliant with a creative, that really appeals. Having said that, we, during the Suddenly launch, got really creative with very standard billboard holdings where I just have to tell you this because it's quite comical if you're not getting into trouble as we did on the day. But what we tried to do is to extend our storyline of Suddenly. It was all about the Nasna fires, and so fire played a critical creative role in what we were doing. And some of the creative was the design of a burning building. And we had smoke machines attached to the billboard that blowed out the smoke. So it looked like the billboard and the building on the billboard was on fire. And it was so real that we got in trouble with local security, who called out the municipal security and fire brigade to come and set out our billboard fires. And we had to stop with that particular initiative. But I think for me, it's less about the format and how you use it. I suppose that's what I'm trying to get to. It's whether it's in contextually very smart. I love the work that we've done on Valentine's Day. I love the work that we do for all of our odd product lines in contextually relevant places. And I love the fact that we were so clever with our billboards and in trying to replicate a moment, and was so truthful that people really responded to it as real fire. Another beautiful way we used it was LED lights. So those spa billboard holdings, beautiful new innovation, and it really, if used creatively, absolutely does brilliant things for your brand messaging.
Mm.
Basically, I
Can
just
I
love
just
out of
say,
home. What can I say? I've mentioned about 5 formats there.
go for it. Don't worry. Someone had to ask me to list mine. Actually, Liv and I did a getting to know your hosts episode, and in the episode we had this quick fire quiz. And one of the questions was from, I think, Liv to me was, what is your favorite format? And it was like, you had to answer like on the spot. And I was like, oh my word, digital out of home, but if you get time to think about it, there's so many formats that, I mean, I've got a passion for out of home. I know, Liv does too. That's why we have the run and host the first and only out of home podcast in South Africa. But if you really think about it, oh my word, I can list a whole lot of formats that are my favorite. But when you were talking about the smoke machine, I had to laugh because I did a campaign and it was a, large format 4x5x18 highway static. And we had it was with JC and then we had like a 3D mold of a car coming through that had crashed through the billboard, and then a smoke machine to show that the car had like crashed through the billboard, even though it wasn't a real car. And we had all these messages about, is the billboard really on fire? That was coming through because of the smoke machine. So I'm like, every time someone speaks about the smoke machine, there's always a story behind using a smoke machine in out of home, and I love it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Almost a bit jelly because I haven't had a billboard that looks like it's on fire. So that's going to have to be on my hit list for the year. So I can join
You
in on the
can't
smoke
say
machine
you're an
drama.
expert if you haven't set a billboard a lot.
I know. What have I been doing all this time?
Right of passage.
Johanni, it's been so amazing sitting down with you. I have loved to get an insight into the campaigns. There's a lot of stuff you mentioned that I actually wasn't aware of. So I've learned a lot in this episode too. So it was such a pleasure. Thank you for sharing with us. I think we're definitely going to be keeping an eye out for what the brand has coming up in the year. And yeah, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for the invitation. I thoroughly enjoyed it myself.
Thanks for joining us today to go beyond the billboard. Subscribe to our podcast to ensure you don't miss out on our exciting content.
Join us again to go beyond the billboard.
1, 2.